Thank you, everyone, for coming. Glad you could make it. And if you're joining through the International Coral Reef Symposium, welcome to the first day of the conference. And if not, welcome to this workshop, utilizing the Allen Coral Atlas to enhance coral reef management and monitoring. So with the next slide, I'm just going to introduce the speakers. Before that, great, thank you so much. And I'll just, since we're not in person, we're doing this remotely. And so I'll start with myself. I'm Helen Fox. I'm at the Coral Reef Alliance. And I'm a coral reef ecologist by training. I've been also set up the field engagement team for the Allen Coral Atlas Partnership and have a lot of experience at the boundary of science and conservation with expertise in Indonesia and the Coral Triangle. So I'll be doing an introduction after we hear from Paulina Gerstner, who is the program director for the Allen Coral Atlas and works at Arizona State University. She's an expert in program management and focuses on projects with lasting global impacts. Zoe Lieb is a program specialist for field engagement for the Allen Coral Atlas at National Geographic Society. Her background is in conservation biology and human-wildlife conflict, and she's going to be moderating this workshop, keeping us to time through our Q&A sessions, and is also going to be one of the facilitators during the GIS exercise. And speaking of that, we want to have this workshop be as interactive as possible. So Dr. Karen Joyce is going to be leading our GIS breakout exercise later in this workshop. She's a senior lecturer in remote sensing at James Cook University and is the co-founder and chief scientist of GeoNadir. And she's an internationally acclaimed biogeographer and educator. We also have additional experts to help us with the breakout groups. Dr. Chris Rolfsema, who's the head of the mapping team for the Allen Coral Atlas at the University of Queensland, and Andrea Rivera Sosa of the Coral Reef Alliance. After the exercise, we're going to hear from Brianna Bambick, program manager at National Geographic Society, leading the field engagement team for the Atlas. She's also a former National Geographic explorer, experienced marine researcher and diver, and she'll be talking about the uses of the Atlas for conservation impact. Is also going to be a breakout group leader, and we'll talk more about the resources available for the Atlas. Wen is joining us from Indonesia as the regional coordinator for field engagement for the Atlas. He specializes in marine spatial planning, marine resource sustainability, and GIS. So he'll be talking about the use of the Atlas in Indonesia and will also be a breakout group facilitator. Last but not least, Sherry Wagner is the Reef Resilience Program Coordinator at the Nature Conservancy. She led the development of the Reef Resilience Network online course, Remote Sensing and Mapping for Coral Reef Conservation, which you'll hear more about later when she presents on the course and additional resources. And also a big shout out to Michelle Gralty and Petra McGowan from TNC. Michelle is running our technical support for this session, and Petra coordinated the creation of this workshop. So thank you both for making this event possible. And with that, I will turn it over to Paulina.
Thank you, Helen. So as Helen gave a lovely introduction, I'm Paulina Gerstner. I'm the program director at Arizona State University. I'll start with a little bit of history about who we are. So this all started in 2017 at Vulcan. I myself was there, and Paul G. Allen, co-founder of Microsoft and founder of Vulcan, he was an avid diver, but started to notice that some of his favorite reefs were no longer healthy and some were even disappearing completely. He wanted to do something about it. So he convened a group of experts, including the wonderful late Dr. Ruth Gates. Unfortunately, we lost both Dr. Gates and Paul Allen early on in the project, but we pushed forward in their legacy. Over the past 6 months, the program has undergone a bit of a transition from being led by Vulcan to today being led by Arizona State University's Center for Global Discovery and Conservation Science by myself and Dr. Greg Asner. The main goals of the program remain the same, and we're motivated more than ever to innovate even more conservation tools for the coral reef community. Helen will give a little bit more background on the program in just a moment, but first, I want to switch to objectives for today. So first, we want you to leave being very familiar with the atlas. That's the most important thing. We also want you to leave the workshop today knowing how the atlas can be used for conservation and management in your particular area of the world. Very tactically, we want you to leave knowing how to use the platform and specifically knowing how to analyze a small area or large area with the help of our expert team. And finally, we want you to leave knowing what resources about the atlas are available to you so that you can use them on your own after the workshop today. So to get to those objectives, the short agenda for our workshop is that first, Helen Fox will introduce the Allen Coral Atlas, why we set out on this challenge, how it's created, and then applications of the product. Then Karen Joyce will introduce the breakout group activity before you're sent to your individual groups to work on the activity. Then Brianna Bambick and Wen will do a special deep dive into an application of the atlas to support conservation in Indonesia. And then we'll wrap up with a review of available resources. So Brianna and Cherie will lead that section. Over to you, Zoe.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Helen and Paulina. As Paulina mentioned, we are going to have time for questions in between each section. And so please keep using the chat to ask those questions or comments. I'll be looking there and passing them to the presenters during our Q&A section. We might not get to every question, so feel free to ask as many as you'd like. We can always follow up after the workshop, and please be sure to stay in touch with us. Before we get started, we are going to have 2 poll questions. The first one, we want to know, where do you work? So that poll will pop up for everyone, and you can let us know. A lot of Southeast Asia Coral Triangle folks. And we've got one other poll question. We want to know a bit more about what you do. So if you want to answer this poll question about what you are, what your role is. So scientists, researchers, awesome. Students, great, love to see that. Okay, so without further ado, I am going to pass over to Helen. Make sure you keep asking questions as this goes along. And it looks like there's a lot of interesting different people out there. So enjoy the presentation. Thanks, everybody. Over to you, Helen.
All right, thank you, Zoe. And again, welcome. If I could have the next slide. What I'm going to do now is just set the stage a little bit more for the Atlas. As mentioned previously, the Atlas team is made up of a consortium of these organizations. You can see the logos along the diagonal there. And collectively, we are the Allen Coral Atlas Partnership. So next slide, please. Also, as Paulina mentioned, Ruth Gates was an early part of the Atlas vision, and it's from her that I first learned about it in February 2018. She researched the corals and their algal symbionts in the hopes of better understanding the bleaching mechanism and possible heat tolerance in a project that soon got nicknamed Super Corals. Here you see her by her tanks of corals in Coconut Island. So this is relatively small scale. Next slide. And Ruth ended up meeting Andrew Zoli of Planet Inc., which had recently launched a fleet of more than 100 Dove satellites, pictured here. And that central portion is about the size of a loaf of bread. And these satellites can remotely sense the planet with high resolution imagery, about 4 by 4 meter pixels. And as Andrew tells it, sparks flew as he and Ruth dreamed of linking the scales from these satellites to the coral and algal symbionts that Ruth studied, with satellites helping to monitor hard to access reefs and maybe even developing an early warning system for coral bleaching. So combined with Paul Allen and Vulcan's interest in coral reef conservation that Paulina spoke of, and other experts in remote sensing and coral mapping, the Atlas was begun. Next slide, please. And so as Paulina mentioned, both Paul Allen and Ruth Gates sadly passed away in October 2018, but this interdisciplinary team from multiple institutions carries on their vision. And we're hoping to honor their legacy with this project. The co-author list you see here is just a subset of the many people working on the atlas to improve how remote sensing and mapping technologies can inform conservation work. Next slide, please. So given that coral reef mapping is hard at large scales, with this workshop, we hope you'll have a chance to explore how the atlas can make the products of remote sensing and reef mapping easier to apply for marine conservation. So Charles Darwin was one of the first to try to globally map reefs, and it's definitely not as straightforward as observing and mapping land. There are the visual limitations from the water. Many reefs are in very hard to reach places, and a lot of expensive equipment is often necessary. Next slide, please. And this slide from ASU highlights some of the many tools that Darwin didn't have. It shows the different spatial scales from what a diver or snorkeler can cover with subsurface imagery down at the bottom, very close up, but you can only cover a very small area, all the way up to the satellite imagery that has larger pixels, but can cover a tremendous amount of the Earth's surface daily. So the atlas maps reef systems, not specific corals themselves. And so it's limited in terms of highly specific local accuracy. So small features are not distinguishable, but it still covers a fairly large, or fairly small pixel as 25 by 25, and it can monitor the reefs globally. The finer scale surveys on the previous slide are expensive at large scales. So overall, there's a poor global state of reef mapping and monitoring globally. And so, yeah, next slide, please. The idea behind the atlas is filling those big spatial and temporal gaps, thinking that more accurate baseline maps will allow for better conservation planning, coral reef management, and restoration. Next slide, please. So this just gives an overview in one slide of how we get there. The satellites are circling the Earth, and that imagery has different colors, as you can see, and then those different colors, through a combination of machine learning and also mapping expertise, get translated to the different classes, different broad classes, and then those in turn get mapped to the atlas that you see. And so that's how we get from pixels in the satellite to the map, with an important step in the middle of actually cleaning up that map data. All right. And so this, again, is just another overview of that atlas project. The satellite imagery, depth data, and field verification gets turned into the atlas. It's on allencoralatlas.org for use in conservation, restoration, and protection. Next slide. These are just a few more specifications and features of the atlas. As I mentioned, there's semi-automatic mapping with machine learning. It provides consistent global coverage. There are two major products. The benthic classes go to 10 meters, the geomorphic zones to 15 meters. The spatial coverage is those tropical coral reefs, 30 degrees north and south latitude. And there's a seamless imagery mosaic that's also available. There's analytic tools available on the platform. You'll see more about that soon. And if you register, there's free downloadable data. A few other downloadable features include a bathymetric layer, a global reef extent layer, and a new product that was, again, just part of the early dream is global coral reef monitoring. And there's also turbidity monitoring data available for download. Right, and these are just a few big picture applications of the atlas. Later in the workshop, you'll hear more about this in depth from Brianna and Wenwen. It can fill data gaps in data deficient areas, provide a globally consistent base layer, inform marine spatial planning projects. It could help with aquaculture siting and prioritization, protected area monitoring, and resilience studies. So as you can see, we've come a long way since Darwin, not only with the atlas, but also with other remote sensing resources and mapping and monitoring tools. And the atlas has rolled out maps region by region. The majority of the world's reefs have been mapped already, and it's projected to be completed in just another few months, which is a huge accomplishment. Next slide, please. And you'll dive into the atlas soon. And I also want to mention briefly what we're trying to do with our field engagement team and why we're working with the Reef Resilience Network. As our name suggests, the goal is to engage a broad range of users, including reef managers at various scales, both to help contribute to ground truthing for input to improve the maps, and then once maps are completed for a region, to successfully access and use the atlas tools. So these photos from Mozambique show field teams collecting calibration and validation data, which the mapping team uses to create benthic and geomorphic habitat maps, which then can be used in several marine spatial planning efforts for the whole coast. Next slide, please. Yes, the other big opportunity we see is with large scale planning. Multiple countries have made big commitments to dramatically scale up their marine protected areas. So having the consistent base maps that the atlas provides would be a big improvement in many parts of the world. It could also be used to improve ecosystem services valuation, which could contribute to innovative financial mechanisms. And these approaches are only possible with strong geospatial data. So with that overview, thank you very much again, and I'll take any questions you might have before we move to the breakout activity.
Awesome. Thanks, Helen. I don't see any questions in the chat so far. Oh, great.
I see a couple have come through.
Yep.
Yes, they're available for any reef within that region so far. And yes, they will, once they've all been mapped. Most of them have been mapped already, and they will be available. They are already for most of the regions, and the final regions will also be available. And the next one, in terms of, it says, given the potential role of turbid reefs, is the atlas able to identify benthic classes in these areas with high accuracy? And unfortunately, the answer to that is no. The turbidity makes it difficult for the satellite remote sensors to basically see through to those reefs. So that is an area where you would need potential local verification. All right, and then I see
time for just one more, Helen, if you want to take one.
Yeah, okay. I see Chris. Please feel free to read the chat. Chris is on. He's the head of the mapping team and is answering some of those questions. How frequently? So it's not yet known when that first baseline map will be updated, although specific regions that were initially done will most likely be redone. There's been a tremendous amount of improvement over the past year. And so those regions will likely be redone over the next few months. And just to confirm what I'd said, that the depth is shallow reefs only, to 10 meters for benthic and 15 meters for geomorphic.
Awesome. I love all these great questions. We will keep answering them in the chat. And also we love to be in touch with everyone working out there in the world. So we'll also stay in touch with you for more follow-up answers and more information. For now, I am going to move on to the next part of our presentation. Next up is Dr. Karen Joyce, who's going to be leading us in the GIS exercise today. I'll get onto the right slide for her. I've already had the pleasure of working with Karen on another online course she presented. She's definitely an expert educator, and I'm really excited to hand it over to her for this stage of our hands-on exercise. Thanks, Karen. Take it away.
Awesome. Thanks heaps, Zoe, and good morning, afternoon, or evening to everyone from wherever you're joining from today. I'm on the land of the Jabbergai people in far north Queensland, Australia. So in the next component, we are going to get our hands on using the atlas And our aim is to answer these 3 questions. So first of all, we want to assess reef geomorphology and benthic habitats. We want to look at coral patches on a specific reef, and also to determine sites for a random sampling routine. Now, Zoe, if you're able to stop sharing your screen for me, please, so that I can jump into sharing mine. I'm going to give a quick demonstration on where we're going today. Yeah, there we're going to jump directly into the Allen Coral Atlas, and we're going to have a look at some of the stuff that you'll be able to see there. So first of all, I'm going to give this super short demo into some of the different layers that we have. So you'll see worldwide, we've got some incredible satellite imagery on the coral reefs around the world. We can use our zooming tools here to come in and have a look at what different reefs look like with the planet data that we've just spoken about. I'm going to come all the way in, and I'm going to give an example around this particular reef, which is this one here is Yanoa Island and Orpheus Island on the Great Barrier Reef. So we can use over here on the right-hand side, we can start to look at some of the layers that exist within the atlas. So we have a look at the benthic map, for example, and we're going to open this up. So we'll see a range of different layers here. So you can zoom in and see, for example, a coral and algae part is all along here. And you'll have the opportunity to do this for yourselves with a handout that steps through this as well. We can also look at the geomorphology of that area. And again, we'll have a look at what the key is for those different colours that you see. Now, we're also able to look at some really basic statistics as well. So let's have a look at this particular area. And as we open that up, we already get some information on the coverage of different geomorphic zones and benthic habitat classes. Now, if you're going to do the if you're going to use the GIS component, from here we'll export some of these data into a GIS. But if you don't have any GIS experience, you'll stay here to delve a little deeper into the atlas. But otherwise, we'll be saving those data and then actually opening it up within QGIS and checking out a couple of little extra parts to answer the other 2 questions that I posed at the beginning. So here are those data, the exact same data that I've pulled into QGIS, and we can color code that if we want. One of the things that we are going to do is to assess how patchy the reef is, and in particular looking at the coral component. So we'll be looking at the number of different polygons that exist within the classification that we have, and the area of those polygons as well. And then our final step will be to say, hey, you know what, we want to create a field survey routine where we're going to visit 10 locations on the reef, and we only want to go in areas where there's coral. And so these spots are the ones that I've prepared earlier of where I figured out that we can get to based on the analysis that we've done in the GIS.
And wow, just thanks everyone, Chris, Andrea, Karen, Paulina, Helen. It's been so wonderful to hear how everything's going. And of course, the big thanks to the TNC team for putting this all together, and this workshop and the participants. Really, wow. I've had so much fun within the last half an hour and just learning with everyone from different oceans and coastlines. I wish we had more time in those little breakout groups. So please stay in touch. For the last segment, before we leave you with further resources and wrap up, in the Q&A session, I'm very excited to share with you the Atlas's new technology for mapping and monitoring of coral reefs on a global scale. I did see a question in the chat about whether the global data set is available, and I'll get to that later. It's something that's in progress. So right now, to do this, I'm going to introduce our new story maps page so you can learn about more applications of the Atlas after the session. And then I'll hand it over to Wenwen to give you a first-hand story of how the Atlas is used in Indonesia. Because we have a special guest with us. In the chat right now, I'm going to give you a chat of where the story maps is, a link to the story maps. The free Allen Coral Atlas Story Map shows you where and how the atlas is applied around the world. On the left, you can click on a pin, for example, the pin near Mozambique. On the right scroll bar, you can identify which type of marine project is using that atlas in that location. For example, in Mozambique, a national strategy and action plan is underway. Researchers Francisco Zizane is using the atlas to identify patches of seagrass and coral algae to locate high biodiverse areas in order to prioritize for protection. Other projects include restoration, ridge to reef, marine spatial plans, and community stakeholder engagement. We plan to add more atlas stories as more marine planners and managers use the global mapping and monitoring technology. Feel free to click the other pins after the session to see how others are using the atlas and potentially spark ideas for you and your team. We'd love to hear your story as well. Now, scrolling down to the story about Indonesia, thanks Zoe, Wen is going to give you a deep dive about how the Ministry of Marine Affairs and Fisheries in Indonesia are using the atlas. Here's a little bit more background on Wen. He's a professional marine planner and has specialized in geographic information system, remote sensing, spatial modeling, and information technology for natural resource management. He has a bachelor's degree in geography from the University of Indonesia and a master in science from Bogor Agricultural University. Wen has a particular interest in spatial planning to balance marine economic development and conservation through the advancement of technology and science. Take it away, Wen.
Okay, thanks, Brianna. So, yeah, I would like to share my screen, but I cannot share. So, yeah, someone.
You are good. Zoe has you.
Okay.
Is it okay? Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Brianna, and hello, everyone. I'm Wen, and good to see you all in this presentation. So I would like to share a case study from Indonesia for the implementation of Allen Coral Atlas to support the management and decision-making process in the Marine Conservation Program. For information, we just started recently for this program implementation, but we are speed up our activities for making good progress while we are now in the pandemic situation. So yeah, in this slide for the outline, I will give you kind of like the overview. The first is about the background for this program activity. And the second is how can the atlas be used for marine conservation and planning in Indonesia. The third is where we are now and what will be our next steps. And then I will give you a short review of the gap analysis for marine conservation work with atlas, and also some of challenges and also the opportunity will be shared in this presentation as well. And the last slide probably we will have like a key message as our lesson learned. Move to the next slide, please. Okay, yeah, in this background slide, you can see the map of Indonesian region. And actually, if you can see the yellow line on the eastern part, that's the coral triangle boundary. I think, yes, you are right that this region has a quite complex and diverse marine biodiversity, including more than 500 coral species, at least per ecoregion, as recorded by the scientists. You can see the Ferron et al. 2009 for the article, for the journal. You can see a lot of information on there. And also Indonesia is the largest archipelagic nation in the world with their 70,000 more islands and a coastline of 108,000 kilometers. And this country has more than 15.8% of the world's coral reef. As the coral reef have been threatened by many illegal activity, such as like the destructive fishing, illegal fishing, and so on, the government of Indonesia has initiated and targeting for the 30 million hectares for the marine protected area by 2030, both at the national level and also at the local level in order to reduce the threats. So, well, it seems quite ambitious, but we believe that it is achievable to protect our coral reefs and their associated habitats. And of course, now we have the atlas that can be used to support this initiative. Okay, we can move to next slide. So yeah, how can the atlas be used for marine conservation and planning in Indonesia? The first is to support the development of the new site selection for marine protected area and also marine protected area networks. the coral reef distribution, both benthic and geomorphic, are the key features, I think, for habitat representation, for numbers and percentage. And of course, if you are a conservation planner and you are familiar with Marsan or Marsan with Jones, I think this decision support tools will require much more data, actually, for the coral reef information, because it's very important for setting the target, and so on, and also for the connectivity modeling. And the second is to monitor and evaluate the existing of marine and coastal zoning plan, both at national and local level. With the atlas, we can track and measure our success at the field, and it's important also for the adaptive management in the zoning plan. And another is also the strategic environmental assessment is another way to guide a future economic development through a sustainable approach, while keep protecting the critical biological area, or at least to minimize any risks. And this is something then they need the coral reef information to reduce any impact for these pristine features. And others is also licensing and permit location is part of the marine planning implementation at the ground. So lack of data or data poor region will lead to any inappropriate decision making for the investment. So we need to making sure that the atlas can provide as much as possible for a good and accurate data. And I think the another is the guiding the sustainable tourism development and developing the carrying capacity model with the coral atlas, I think is very crucial. And this is what also atlas can do. And also the last, as our country already has a supporting tool, but we don't have any good data for the high resolution of coral reef, then we are planning to integrate this system with the atlas. So moving to next slide. So yeah, the concept of the integrated system is to link the existing platform in our national conservation database that we call it SIDACO, or System Data Conservasi, with the atlas through what we call it the Web Mapping Services, or WMS, and also the Web Feature Services, or WFS. So this is the server can connect, interchange the data for the benthic geomorphic data, and that can be visualized and overlay with our conservation database. So with this integrated system, the leadership and stakeholders can working together. So the public awareness for the coral reef protection is improved and also enhanced through local community support. So this is in your in this picture, if you can see, there's the local community that they're working together, and then it's kind of like the good data. So in here, I think the atlas will be very important to support how they can delineate the boundary. Okay, moving to next slide. So yeah, in this slide, you can see on the left figure that this is the data that we use now for the coral reef maps. This data was extracted from Landsat satellite imagery. It has only 30 meters spatial resolution. This data was last updated on 2010, 2011. So it seems to all for guiding the decision making, right? But unfortunately, the good one that we have the atlas data now. So for the benthic and geomorphic, information with the resolution 4 and 10 meters. As you can see on the right side, is very detailed and precisely mapped through a consistent of scientific methods. So it's very up-to-date data that coming from the satellite imagery that acquired in 2018 and 2020. Okay, moving to next slide. So where we are now, I think, yes, as already mentioned, that the initial meeting is already start in May. And actually, we already moved now from June to July. And the good news in June that the atlas data is already accepted by our government to be published in the international national database system. So we are working together with the Ministry of Marine Affairs now to how to develop the interface for the national database. And in July now we try to integrate the data. We can do the what we call testing and some exercise that hoping in by end of August or in September we can launch the system in the national level. So we are hoping that when the launch data it can be accessed by everyone, and everyone can see the overlay between the coral atlas data and then also with the conservation. Next slide. So yeah, this is the gap analysis for marine conservation work with atlas in Indonesia. The marine protected area is managed by the two ministerial level at Marine Affairs and Fisheries, and also Ministry of Environment and Forestry, and others also managed by the province. if you can see the numbers that right now the coral reef in total is already almost 30%. It's already meet the target, I think, for the what we call for in the protected areas. So it's already on there. But hoping that our government is working to ensure that this coral reef system is effectively being managed and protected. So yeah, this is the calculation that we already have now. And moving to next slide, please. Yeah, the challenges and opportunity, I think this is the classic issue. I think lack of resources and budget allocation are listed as the current situation, that all funding allocation for system development is reduced due to the pandemic issue and other priority for health care system and etc. And also lack of mapping data to be structured in the same format is another challenge. I think that each of organization has their own format standard and structure. And also inconsistency in data issue are linked to different approach of method and extra still exists. And data sharing protocol is still ongoing also now. Hopefully that in the future we have the good data sharing protocol that everyone can exchange the data in officially. And most of marine and coastal management now in Indonesia is moving from planning to implementation action. So the system, the Atlas, and then our national database is important to support this implementation process. So as the data will be published on the internet, then the data will be exposed to the public, and the data transparency will keep open for anyone to be assessed. Last, I think. Okay, last but not least, I will share the key messages or lesson learned for this case study. I think the Atlas will bring a significant impact for marine conservation and planning in Indonesia. And the second, that more accessible coral reef information with good accuracy and detail will be very important to support an effective coral reef management. Finding a meaningful collaboration between government, scientists, technology developers, stakeholders, and local community will be a great resources to reduce the threats for coral reef. I think that's all from me. I will send it back to the Brianna or Joy. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Wen. That was great. It's great to hear how Indonesia and the ministry is using the Atlas, and great to hear that they accepted it in their data set plan. And not only is it wonderful to hear the great efforts that is happening in Indonesia, but it has also just been a joy to learn and work with Wen. He has taught our team so much about the Indonesian region and has commented on the accuracy of the maps to help improve the machine learning process. So us at Alan Coral Atlas truly appreciate him. So now I'd like to open it up for Q&A for Wen and for the team. If there's any other questions that have come through, we have a couple minutes. And just to kind of follow up on the chat, there was a question from Jonathan about using underwater multi-hyperspectral data sets or RGB images, and if that would help input the data. And the answer is, Zoe, thank you for putting in something in the chat, and Chris, that Chris and team is always looking for more data. We're not always able to use all of it because we are wrapping up the mapping process. But if you have any georeference benthic data that can be used, the best is to make sure that the underwater spectrometry is georeferenced, and then we are able to hopefully use it. And its best is the photo transects.
And I see a new question we have from Amy about how the global coverage of the Atlas compares with the UNEP global distribution of warm water coral reefs currently. I'll take a first stab at that. Amy, I think we nearly have the same global coverage. We still have, I believe, 3 more regions that aren't made public yet, but they will be done shortly. So the Atlas has almost reached our global goal of all tropical regions. So that's 30 degrees north and south latitude. Do others know how that compares to UNEP? If I'm missing something here?
I think that's correct, but one thing I would just add is that in terms of the total amount, if that's the question about the coverage, it's likely will be considerably less given that this is a different approach, it's basically a different method for estimating the coral and algal cover. So the number will likely be quite different from the UNEP's estimate of global coral coverage. But this is mostly just a reflection of the different methodology used to create those numbers.
The main thing to keep in mind that the UNEP layer is made for different variety of methods, where the atlas is all used the same method to map. Every reef got the same treatment and making it very comparable.
Another question. Oh, go ahead, Bree.
No, go. I was just seeing there was a question for Wenwen. What will be the major conflict development, such as oil and gas, if the data becomes transparent to the MMAF? Wenwen, do you want to take that?
Yeah. So I think, yes, oil and gas is also the major issue right now. But again, I think our government is very wise with this. So if we found a reef on there, there will be something that we can prioritize first, compared to the oil and gas. But of course, there will be some win-win solution or the trade-off, between this. So I cannot say this is the, the conflict, but this is how we can find a good solution to be on there. I think that's, the Brianna. Hopefully that can answer the question.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So there's one question, a couple more coming in, so we might not get out to all of them, but we'll try this one. It says from Nipuna, can we contribute to mapping and ground truthing in local level? And I love this question. It's so great to see that you want to help out. I'd say get in touch with us after the session at support@allencoralatlas.org. There's a chance that your region might be improved in the future. So if you're able to do some ground truthing, we could send you a protocol and see what timing, if possible, to get into our maps. I don't know if Chris or anybody else has a follow-up on that.
Chris answered in the chat. There was also a question about the protocol, and there is a standard protocol based on the one developed by Chris and team at the University of Queensland, and that is available on the Atlas website or via the Atlas website. There's a substantial protocol. But yeah, Zoe just put that in the chat. Great, thanks, Zoe. And in terms of accuracy, that's been asked a couple times in terms of, so it does vary. I have not yet seen a summary of the findings about accuracy. Again, I'm going to punt that to Chris.
I'm just typing it. So for the
great, perfect. You could do both.
Yeah, for the Benthic map, so basically the field data is used to create the reference data set. The reference data set is one part used for creating the maps, and an independent part is used to do the accuracy assessment. This is for every mapping region. So and there's 28 mapping regions. Then that results in an accuracy, and the accuracy that, for those who know remote sensing or accuracy assessment, is the standard error matrix is created, and it results in a map accuracy and an individual map category accuracy. The map accuracy varies between about, let's say, 65 to 90% for geomorphic, and for benthic it's a bit lower, but in the same range. That doesn't mean, just keep in mind that an accuracy assessment is always an assessment of how good the reference data is. It's not directly means that everything in the map is perfect.
Thanks, Chris. That's a great synopsis, great summary of the accuracy layer. And we have more information on the website. So thanks everyone for all the questions. We'll try to get to more of them later. We're going to move on to our last little section before we wrap up the workshop. We would like to leave you with some extra resources and next steps to connect and collaborate with us in the future. First of all, we would love to hear from you on how you're using the Atlas. You can go back to the last screen, Zoe. how are you using the atlas in the maps, either research, conservation, or informing policy? The reef network is key for global coral reef recovery, especially when early adapters can help other regions and organizations adapt the Allen Coral Atlas to reach their conservation goals. So we hope that you guys here, there was 150 people signed up. We had to turn people down. We hope you all connect with us so we can create a great network to really push coral reef conservation. In an effort to build capacity worldwide, we've created a free online course with our partners at the Nature Conservancy. It is available in 4 languages: English, Spanish, French, and Bahasa. So I'll hand it over to Sherry Wagner to tell you more. Thanks, Sherry.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Brianna, for doing a little intro. Yeah, so as Brianna said, we have created a free online course. It's self-paced. You can take it whenever you want. We want to make sure that you don't feel like there's no support after the workshop today. The course has applications and case studies and hands-on exercises, as well as quizzes for you to test your knowledge on what you've learned. And there is a certificate of completion. And just to give you a little bit more information on what's in the course, so it's made up of 3 lessons. The first lesson, Introduction to Remote Sensing and Coral Reef Mapping, introduces the key concepts of remote sensing and applications for marine conservation. This lesson will give you a basic understanding of remote sensing and mapping from satellite imagery. And it does provide a foundation for lessons 1 and 2. So next slide. I'm sorry, for lessons 2 and 3. So this is lesson 2, using the Allen Coral Atlas. So this is all about the atlas. A lot of the questions that came up today are described in further detail in this lesson, has applications for management, conservation, and research. And the lessons will give you hands-on exercises similar to what we did today, but you'll learn a little bit more. There's videos as well about how to navigate and step-by-step guidelines for using it in more advanced applications. Then the final lesson, next slide, is about multi-scale mapping of coral reefs in the Caribbean. It introduces remote sensing technology to map at multiple scales and builds on the previous 2 lessons, addressing management questions that target live coral cover, reef health, and monitoring changes at the colony level. And we're putting the links in for you. So go to the next slide, please. As Brianna said, it's available in English, Spanish, French, and Bahasa, Indonesia. And so here on this slide, I just put in the links. We have some more content on the Reef Resilience website. So that's the first link. That's really a summarization of what's in the course. You can read more about the actual lessons like I just described in that second link, and you can enroll in the English version. In the third link, there's also links on that English page to the other languages. And that's it for me. I'll turn it back over to Brianna.
Excellent. Thanks again, Sherry. And a big shout out to Anik and Petra and the whole TNC team. There's a group effort for truly making that course easily accessible and digestible for everyone. So, and thanks Karen for the endorsement. We had 176 people sign up for the mentored online course in March, and over 700 people take the course so far. So we encourage you to take advantage of this free resource and pass along to interested colleagues. So next I'll cover a couple most frequently asked questions. We already saw this one, but is the map going to be updated and when? And we have been extensively trying to collect as much feedback as we mentioned earlier and existing data as possible in hopes to improve the machine learning process. So we are planning for updates in a few early regions and to also continue validation of the bleaching monitoring system. So to stay informed on these updates, please sign up for the Allen Coral Atlas newsletter. We only send an email once a month, and so it won't flood your inbox. And think somebody can pop the chat, the link in the chat box for the newsletter. Right now. Great, thank you, Zoe. And another way to connect with us is through support at allencoralatlas.org. For example, if you are having more trouble with the website, maybe a download feature isn't sending the data and you've waited a couple days, our team can potentially find a solution. And we've already covered the feedback at allencoralatlas.org. We again encourage you to respond. If you find a glitch in the map or maybe a reef is missing, that's over half a kilometer, and you have ground truth data to validate, please drop us a line. We are recording all the feedback for the mapping to review, but we might not be able to incorporate every fix since this is a machine learning process. And we still welcome all feedback of all types, knowing this is version 1 and on a global scale. So lastly, we are looking for validation of the bleaching monitoring system. If you are especially interested in this aspect or your research pertains to this, please participate in our bleaching monitoring survey. And we're going to put that in the chat as well. Right now, it's only 5 minutes. It will take you no time at all. And Andrea Riviera Somoza on our coral team will follow up. So thanks, Andrea, for being on the line. We can do next slide, please. And of course, you can please join us on our social media at Allen Coral Atlas on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn. There you can discover projects using the Atlas tools, connecting with us, and being a part of our community. And with that, I want to say another huge thank you to all the participants and special thanks to everyone involved in making this workshop happen. That includes ICRS for putting on this virtual event. We, of course, wish we could see you all in person. So one final ask for the workshop is please send us a picture of you and your team using the Atlas, and we'll post on our socials to highlight your coral story. Thank you so much. Wish you the best of luck in your endeavors and conservation goals. Back to Zoe to wrap it up and maybe one more poll.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Brianna. Thank you, everyone. Like Bree said, this was definitely a team effort. I'll stay on my slide for a second. We do have one final poll, and we will have a bit more time for questions. For the end of workshop survey, did this training help you identify ways to use the Atlas in your work? So let us know, yes, still unsure, or no. And we'd also love to know on a scale of 1 to 3 to rate your confidence in using the Atlas to analyze a specific coral reef area. So please let us know your poll answer. Cool. Lots of yeses, no nos. Thanks, guys. Glad no one didn't. Glad that no one thought that this wasn't helpful to them. So I'm glad you all came. And I'm glad to see that most people have a basic understanding. Maybe they need some more information about how to use the tools, which is great. As you saw from Sherry and Brianna, there are lots more ways you can continue to learn about Atlas. So either staying in touch with us or taking that online course. And I'm gonna look through to see if there's any other questions coming in. Yeah, and Karen, thanks so much for sharing your exercise with us. I know we had a really wonderful workshop with that Karen put on a few weeks ago, which was excellent. So thanks, Karen, for being here.
Right now, we don't have a global data set downloadable. We suggest you download each region by region. However, they are thinking about this, and the engineering team has it on their to-do list. So that's another good reason to stay in touch on the newsletter, because you'll find out when that is available.
There is actually a bit of extra info that might not be apparent to everyone about those regional downloads. So there are, we showed you how to get a download with the Polygon tool, but you can directly download regions if you go to the mapped region section on the top bar on the Atlas. From there, you can download a pre-packaged benthic and geomorphic download package for an entire region. So that will speed up your ability to make those downloads. You don't need to draw a polygon around an entire region. So please use that function instead. There are download directions on the resources page, so please refer there. We are at 10:45, or wherever you are in the world, the 45 of the hour. Also, thanks especially to everyone who joined us from all over the world. I know it's a pretty late night for especially Karen and Chris, so thank you both. And Wen, I'm sure this is, I don't know what time it is for you, but I know this is not an ideal hour for a lot of us, and early morning for our US West Coast folks. So we so appreciate everyone being flexible when we have a global community like this.